This story was sent in by someone who asked to stay anonymous. According to them, it happened last October in a quiet little neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where everyone mows their lawns the same day and no one ever locks their doors. The Wilson family had lived there for almost 10 years. A husband, wife, and their 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Every Halloween, they went all out. Fog machines, hanging ghosts, fake gravestones, and of course, carved pumpkins. They made a small tradition out of it, 3 pumpkins, 1 for each of them, always left out on the porch until the first snow. But the year before last, they forgot to throw them away. Maybe they were too busy, maybe they just overlooked it. Either way, when spring came around, only 2 of the pumpkins had rotted down to mush. The third one, the one Lily had carved, was still there, completely intact. At first, they thought it was just dried out or mummified, but it wasn't. It looked freshly carved, the green sharp, the edges smooth, the color bright orange as if it had been picked yesterday. Neighbors joked that maybe Lily had found some kind of miracle pumpkin, but as months passed, the joke lost its humor. By the time summer rolled in, the pumpkin hadn't changed at all. It hadn't shriveled, hadn't molded, hadn't even dulled in color. It looked alive. By mid-September, Mrs. Wilson started to notice faint lines under the pumpkin's surface. Not cracks, but something more like veins. She brushed it off as her imagination, but when she leaned in closer one morning, she swore she saw a faint pulse, just once, like something living was under the skin. She didn't tell her husband right away. He'd been working longer hours, coming home looking pale and tired, and she didn't want to sound crazy. But she did start avoiding the porch at night. Every time she walked past the window, she felt like the pumpkin was turned slightly more toward the house, like it was watching through the glass. In October, Lily started saying she was having dreams. She said she saw faces in the candlelight inside the pumpkin, faces that smiled and whispered her name. Her parents told her it was just imagination, but there were nights when they'd hear her talking in her room, murmuring to someone softly. When asked about it, she said she was talking to the pumpkin. By Halloween week, things got worse. One night, the Wilsons came home late from a school event. The porch light was off. When they turned it on, the pumpkin's grin seemed wider, visibly stretched, as though the carving had changed. Around the edges of the wood railing, faint red marks were visible, thin like veins reaching outward. Mr. Wilson went out with gloves and tried to move it, but the pumpkin didn't budge. It felt heavier than before, dense, like something had grown inside it. When he lifted it, the underside was damp. The boards beneath it were discolored, almost black, as if something had seeped through. That same night, around 3 a.m., Mrs. Wilson woke up to a soft, rhythmic sound coming from downstairs. A slow thump, thump like a heartbeat. It was faint but steady. When she walked toward the front door, it grew louder. When she peeked through the window, the candle inside the pumpkin was burning, even though no one had lit it in nearly a year. She stood there frozen, watching the flame flicker. For a moment, she thought she saw something behind the light, a silhouette, like a hand pressing from inside the pumpkin's wall. Then the flame went out. The next morning, there were small red stains on the porch, thin trails leading from the pumpkin to the doormat. Mr. Wilson blamed raccoons. He scrubbed the stains off, moved the pumpkin into a trash bag, and drove it out to the local landfill that evening. He tossed it in himself. He even watched the workers compact the pile with the bulldozer before driving back home. But when he pulled into the driveway an hour later, the pumpkin was sitting back on the porch, clean, untouched, smiling the same way it always had. Mrs. Wilson refused to go outside after that. Lily started sleeping with the pumpkin visible through her window. She said it made her feel safe. But safety was the last thing that pumpkin brought. Because a week later, Mr. Wilson started to change. He was pale, sweating all the time, complaining of constant headaches. When he took off his shirt one morning, his wife saw it. Faint red lines crawling up his sides, pulsing like veins beneath the skin. By Halloween night, he could barely stand. And that's when the neighbors reported hearing the screaming. By the time the police arrived at Halloween night, the porch was empty. The front door hung open, and there were deep red stains leading into the living room. The house was silent, but the officers said it smelled faintly of burnt wax and something sweet, like rotting fruit. They found Mrs. Wilson sitting at the kitchen table, trembling. Her hands were coated in a thin film of something orange. She couldn't speak at first, just kept muttering a single phrase over and over. "It's inside him." The officers searched the house and backyard, but Mr. Wilson and Lily were gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just a strange, sticky residue near the porch, the kind you'd get if you smashed a pumpkin and left it to dry in the sun. But this residue was darker, almost blood-colored. Later that night, one of the officers reported seeing something out by the tree line behind the property. A faint glow, like a small orange light flickering between the branches. But when they went to check, it disappeared. The Wilson house sat empty for months after that. No one wanted to buy it, not even at half price. People claimed they'd see a dim orange light through the windows late at night. Others said they heard faint thumping noises coming from the porch. Then, almost exactly a year later, a new family moved in. The Carters, husband, wife, and 2 boys. They knew the story, of course. Everyone in the neighborhood did, but they didn't believe in ghost stories. The Wilsons' disappearance was still listed as unsolved, but most people figured it was a murder-suicide, or that they'd just left town. During the first week of October, the Carters began cleaning the yard. While clearing dead leaves from under the porch, Mr. Carter found something strange, a pumpkin. It was buried halfway in the dirt, perfectly preserved, its orange skin smooth and firm. There was no rot, no sign of decay. He brought it up, cleaned it off, and left it on the porch as decoration. That night, he joked to his wife that it looked almost too perfect. By the next morning, a small crack had formed along one side. When they looked closer, they saw something red underneath. Not pumpkin flesh, but something that looked disturbingly like tissue. Within days, the pumpkin began to change. Its carved grin, which neither of them remembered carving, seemed to widen slightly every time they walked by. The candle inside would flicker to life randomly, even though they'd never lit one. The kids started complaining about scratching sounds coming from under the floorboards at night. Mr. Carter brushed it off as animals, but every morning, small orange stains appeared around the base of the porch, like sap or blood. One night, around 2 a.m., Mrs. Carter went to check the noise herself. She opened the front door, and for a split second, saw movement on the porch, a figure crouched over the pumpkin, hands buried inside it. When the motion light flicked on, it was gone. But the pumpkin was open, a large split down its side, something glistening inside. And beneath the folds of orange skin, she saw what looked like an eye, a human eye. It moved, focusing on her, blinking once before vanishing back into the pulp. The next morning, the pumpkin was whole again. From that point on, the Carters' youngest son started acting strange. He'd sit for hours staring at the pumpkin, whispering under his breath. When his mother asked who he was talking to, he said, "The man inside. He says he used to live here." 2 nights before Halloween, the boy woke screaming. When his parents rushed in, he was standing in the corner, covered in something orange and wet. He said the man in the pumpkin had been calling for him, telling him to help finish growing. Mr. Carter finally decided to get rid of it. He drove 10 miles out of town, threw the pumpkin into a river, and watched it sink. He came home relieved, thinking it was over. But the next morning, it was sitting back on the porch. That was the night everything ended. Neighbors reported hearing the Carters' front door slam repeatedly around 4 a.m. Someone called 911 after, seeing smoke coming from the house. By the time firefighters arrived, the interior was burned beyond saving. But on the porch, untouched by flame, sat the pumpkin. Still fresh, still grinning. When investigators searched the ruins, they found something beneath the porch steps, a hollow space, lined with what they first thought were roots. But when they cut into them, they realized they weren't roots at all. They were veins. At the very bottom of the cavity, there was something encased inside hardened orange flesh. A body, male, middle-aged, later confirmed through dental records to be Daniel Wilson. The report said he'd been dead for almost a year. But what didn't make sense, what no one could explain, was that his eyes were open. His skin was still warm. And when they lifted him out, the veins that had been feeding from the pumpkin snapped like elastic bands, spraying a dark orange liquid that smelled of blood and wax. The coroner's official statement listed the cause of death as undetermined, but one of the firefighters, off the record, said something strange. He said that after the pumpkin was taken to the evidence facility, one of the technicians noticed a sound coming from inside it. A faint, steady thump, 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 like a heartbeat. And according to him, when they turned off the lights, the pumpkin started to smile wider,